Garmin is known for its mapping and navigation technology. I am known for getting lost, even if I've got a map. Can the Garmin 945 LTE save me from myself? It's time to hit the trails and take this watch for a run. Yo, what's going on everybody? My name is Kofuzi and I am a dude who runs a lot. And today I'm gonna be taking a look at the Garmin 945 LTE. It's this watch here that I've been running with for about a month now, taking it on all the activities that I've done over that time. But first, I do wanna go over some disclosures. This is a watch that I purchased myself. No one sent it to me. No one's paying me to make this video. And no one's gonna get a chance to preview any of my footage or my thoughts before you guys get a chance to see this video on YouTube. With that disclosure out of the way, let's talk about the Garmin 945 LTE. Now I'm going to divide this review up in 3 sections, keeping in mind that there are a million things to talk about with watches of this caliber. And I'm going to kind of focus in very narrowly on the things that I care about the most as a guy that primarily is a road runner, occasionally gets on trails, occasionally gets on the bike, sometimes swims. And so the way that I'm going to look at this watch is I'm going to talk about it from a daily use perspective, like what's it like to just wear this thing all the time for all of your activities. Then I'm going to talk about the metrics that I can collect, the data that I can collect while I'm doing the activities that I'm doing. Then I'm going to talk about the analytics. What can I do once I've collected all that data? How can I look at it? How can I slice it and dice it to better understand what I'm doing, how my body is responding to the training, and how I can use that information to guide my future training. And the last thing that I'll talk about kind of in its own category is the mapping feature, because that's the main reason that I went to the Garmin 945 LTE is because of the fact that over the 745 that's in the Garmin lineup, the 945 has full color maps. All right, first let's talk about daily use. Living with this thing is just absolutely fantastic. This watch is so comfortable. The wristband here is made out of a silicone, very flexible, very soft against the skin. It's one of the more comfortable bands that I've come across in terms of GPS running watches. And it's paired with a very light watch in and of itself. The Garmin 945 LTE, the watch portion is 49 grams, making it a very, very lightweight watch. And the display type is a sunlight visible transflective memory in pixel display. It's kind of like an e-ink reader when I'm just looking at numbers and text, but it's nice and bright when there is color or when I am looking at any of the maps. In terms of battery life, I'd say it's okay. In terms of my real world usage, I was getting about 5 to 6 days before I felt like I really needed to top up on battery life. Overall, I think the watch looks fantastic and it feels fantastic. So in terms of having it as a part of my daily life, I feel like the Garmin 945 LTE fits in absolutely seamlessly. Now let's talk about some of the metrics that you can collect. There are a ton of sensors. They've got GPS, GLONASS, and Galileo. Now, I'm not going to go into details in terms of like point by point how accurate is this GPS watch, but I do feel like the GPS tracings are generally accurate enough to rely on for using it for pace and distance calculations while you're running. And overall, I felt like unless you're in an urban area, which sometimes I am by very tall buildings here in Chicago, that's the only time where the GPS might get a little bit wonky, and otherwise I find it to be very, very reliable. For those of you who need more accuracy than what the GPS might be able to provide, or if you live in an urban area with lots of tall buildings or a rural area with lots of canyon type of walls, that's where using a foot pod, like I use the Stride foot pod, which is fully compatible with the Garmin 945 LTE. That way you can get a GPS independent pace and distance calculation. I was able to use the Stride with this with pretty much no problems at all. It's a little bit complicated to kind of pair it. You have to download a separate app from the Garmin Connect store to be able to use it. So there's a couple of kind of steps that you have to go through, but once you do that, you only have to do it once, and then it's always just going to remember that Stride foot pod, and you'll have that power data plus all the other Stride data that you want to be able to collect, and you'll get your pace and distance coming from the Stride foot pod rather than from GPS. Now, in terms of the heart rate sensors, there is a heart rate sensor built into this watch. For me, I think it's a combination of my skin tone plus my wrist shape. Wrist-based heart rate optical monitors never work for me. I mean, they work for like the first 20 minutes of a run, but after that, it's just kind of like the heart rate just spikes, even though my heart rate might be nice and under control. And so I always use an external heart rate monitor, regardless of which brand of GPS running watch that I'm using. And I was able to pair a different brand's heart rate monitor to the Garmin 945 LTE, and I was able to use those without any problem. The only thing that I found a little bit difficult with both the FootPod and the external heart rate monitor is that it wasn't always exactly clear to me whether or not those devices were kind of paired up before I started an activity, before I went out for a run. So sometimes I would go out for a run and then I would go look and see what my power numbers are, and it would just get kind of a blank in the Garmin watch because apparently I started it before the FootPod and the watch had synced up before the run. Now, in terms of being able to connect to other devices like FootPods and heart rate monitors, the Garmin 945 LTE has Bluetooth connectivity, ANT+, Wi-Fi, and also it has an LTE radio in here. Now, the one thing to note is that it's not like an Apple Watch. You're not gonna be able to send and receive text. You're not gonna be able to like make phone calls from this watch, and streaming music you can kind of do, but not really. You can use either Spotify or Apple Music to like download your playlists and get them onto the watch, but you're not gonna be using the LTE radio for that. I didn't do a lot of testing of some of the LTE features. A lot of them are kind of safety oriented and not really something that I felt like I needed or was that interested in. There's lots of other videos that are out there, but that is something to keep in mind if you're looking at the 945, that there is a regular 945 version and then a 945 LTE. Now, the other sensor that I find particularly important is the barometric altimeter. That's the way that the watch figures out what your altitude is. Now, a lot of watches that don't have a barometric altimeter, what they do is they use the GPS tracing, and I think they kind of like look at a table and figure out what is the altitude recorded for that GPS location, and they kind of figure out what your altitude for your run was based on that. With the barometric altimeter, the watch is taking measurements itself and it can figure out what your altitude above sea level is. So I feel like that's a little bit more accurate in terms of what your elevation gain or loss was over the course of the run. And I feel like the Garmin altimeter works better than the altimeter from other brands that I've compared it to. It just feels like I'm getting a much more accurate sense of what the altitude changes were. So I was really impressed with how well this one worked. Now, let's look at some of the analytics that you can do on top of the data that this watch collects. Now, one of the things that you can certainly do is look at your run activities after the fact. And I've done this for a lot of my runs just to kind of see if the numbers are making sense and everything kind of is recording as it should. And the other thing that I've done with it is to look at how I've done over the course of structured workouts that I've set up for the watch and for races as well. Now, the structured workouts worked really well for me. They helped kind of guide me through the workout, telling me when do I need to run harder and how hard do I need to run and when can I rest, all that kind of thing. And then when I wanted to go look at the workout after the fact, the data was laid out in a really nice and concise way that made it easy for me to kind of understand both at a glance and at a detail just how well or not well I did for that particular workout. And I was really happy with the way that the data looked there. Now, the other thing that I did was I took it on a couple of races, the most notable being the LA Marathon. For the most part, I was able to look at kind of like the splits and the altitude changes and the power numbers in a way that I found to be adequate. Now, the other kind of analytics that the Garmin can do relates more towards your recovery. And one of the things that it can do is it can track your sleep and tell you what your like deep sleep, REM sleep, light sleep, sleep interruptions, all that kind of stuff was. How long did you sleep? All that's very useful information. One of the things that I wish it would do better is kind of like give me an indication based on my sleep, like how recovered am I for the next day. Now, Garmin tries to do this in a couple of ways. They've got like the body battery to kind of tell you how recharged you are, but I feel like that's not as specific as I kind of would like the information to be. I don't mind having like a big global summary, but I'd like to be able to look deeper into some of the data, like heart rate variability while I'm sleeping, beat to beat interval, respiration rate, all that kind of thing, to help me really understand like what is my body doing when I'm sleeping. The other kind of information that Garmin gives you that I think is interesting but ultimately not that helpful is the performance condition. And that's something that as you're running, it takes like heart rate data, pace information, and a lot of other metrics and combines it after about like anywhere between 5 and 20 minutes, I think is where it comes out. For me, it usually happens at about like 2/3 of a mile into my run. It tells you what your performance condition is for that day. So basically like halfway through my warm up, it'll tell me, am I at like a 0, a -1, meaning like maybe take it easy today, or a +1 or +2. But that really, again, wasn't all that helpful to me either, except for like on the days when I already knew I was tired, it knew I was tired and gave me like a -1. On the days where I felt good, it gave me a +1. So it was kind of validating in that way, but it wasn't ultimately all that helpful. It didn't make me change any of my workouts or my runs. Now, the last thing that I want to talk about is how the maps did. Now, there are full color maps, and for any activity that you're doing, you can add a data screen that will show you the map. It'll show where you are in relation to all the things around you, because there is a compass in the watch as well. So between the GPS and the compass, it can tell exactly where you are and which direction you're headed. So even if you aren't like setting up a route that you want to follow, if you're just out there running and you want to know where you are, you can have the maps available to you. And the maps are useful in certain respects if you're out there kind of exploring, in terms of it can tell you what are some of the near points of interest in your area, depending on which direction you want to go. And it can help you do things like find your way home if you're absolutely lost and you need some breadcrumbs back to the place where you started. So the maps can do all that kind of thing. The main thing that I wanted to look at though is when I go trail running, I usually have some sort of route mapped out because I need to kind of figure out like, well, how far am I going to run on a particular day? What the elevation is going to be in terms of the total gain, and about how long is that going to take me? Because I could go out to a trail and get lost really easily. So I want to make sure that I'm running for like an hour and a half to 2 hours at a time if I'm hitting the trails, and not accidentally getting stuck out there for 4 or 5 hours or more. And so I usually have a course kind of mapped out, and then I'll take that course, whether I make it in Strava or anywhere else, and then get that route put onto the watch. Then once you hit start, there's a different screen. You can still see all your regular data stuff, but you're also going to get a different kind of screen. And the way that it looked for me every time I did course or map navigation was that it would give me the name of the course that I'd set out. It would give me an arrow in terms of which way I need to be kind of running, whether it's kind of directly straight ahead, a little bit to the left or to the right. And then it would have two things: how much distance is left on the course and how far off course am I currently, which is kind of like all the most important things that I generally need. What it didn't show me in all my testing was like me on the map in relation to everything else. Now, this may be because all the testing that I did for the mapping and the courses were on like trails. They weren't on roads, so maybe that's why it didn't. But the two main areas that I kind of did, I tested it a lot, but the two main areas I looked at was I did a shakeout run in Washington, D.C. before the Cherry Blossom 10 mile. And that took us on a lot of kind of like not necessarily trails, but paths. And I had to manually kind of like pinpoint all those routes when I set up the route. And then the footage that you saw at the beginning of this video when I was in Backbone State Park in Eastern Iowa. And so for both of those times, all I got was kind of very similar to like a breadcrumb type of map that you might have seen in other watches, where it tells you this is the direction you need to go, and it kind of like doesn't show you the entire map around you. For the most part, I was able to navigate everywhere I needed to go on this run in Backbone State Park without getting lost at all. There was 1 or 2 times where I kind of like took the wrong turn for a bit, but then the watch let me know that I was like, hey, you missed it. And so I was able to backtrack really quickly and get right on to course again. And it usually gave me the notifications in enough time ahead that like I was able to see that, okay, in 135 feet, I'm going to make a hard left. It gave me enough time to kind of figure out, all right, look for where the path is going to veer off. It has done a better job than any other watch's mapping software in preventing me from getting lost. So I have to say, mission accomplished for the Garmin 945 LTE. Now, the reason why I give such hesitation for that is I don't like digging through the menus on this watch interface for the full color map to zoom in and zoom out, whether it's on the Garmin 945, other brands when I've looked at maps. Like, I just don't like it a lot. And a lot of times I get frustrated and I have to whip out the phone anyway. Because if I'm at the point where I've got to dig through menus and look at the maps on the watch, zooming in and out, panning left and right, I probably can't do that while I'm running on the trail. And so I've got to stop. And so at that point, I might as well pull out the phone and look at a bigger map and be able to navigate myself a little bit more easily that way. I'm thinking on certain runs, I'm just going to want to bring my phone. And those are the runs where I'm probably not racing. So having the extra weight of a phone is probably okay. I might even have a pack on if it's a very long run. So there's always room for a phone in a pack. So I'm starting to think that I'm not sure that even I need the full color maps of the Garmin 945 LTE. So overall, I'm not sure that this is a watch that I'm going to be recommending to a lot of you guys out there. The 745 is probably going to suffice for all of you guys who are looking at the 945. So those are my thoughts on the Garmin 945 LTE after about a month of running with it and trying to get lost with it. Let me know in the comments if you have any other questions, or better yet, stop by the live stream that I do Monday through Friday right here on YouTube. I'd love to talk to you guys in the chat. That's all I have for today, everybody. Thanks for making it all the way to the end of the video. Hopefully you guys are staying safe out there on your runs, and I will see you in the next one.
Yo, what's going on?